Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the second webcast in our ThingWorx UI series, IoT Application Makeover Edition, 4 techniques to enhance your UI design. I'm Clint Detweiler-Aldifer, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Our speaker today is Sveta Saul, Principal Partner Engineer on the Technology Platform team here at PTC. Sveta has several years' experience as a professional designer and programming engineer with a focus on UI and user experience. We would like this webcast to be interactive, so please feel free to join the conversation. You can post questions in the Q&A pane at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer all inquiries during our closing Q&A. In the event we are unable to get to your question directly, we will have one of our team members follow up with you. If you do experience any issues listening to or viewing today's webcast, please refer to the Event Help Guide link I will provide attendees via our group chat. We also recommend viewing this webinar in Firefox for an optimal experience. One last note before we get started. We'll be recording today's webcast, and we'll send the recording to all registrants as soon as it's made available. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Sveta.
Good morning. Thank you, Clint. My name is Sveta Saul, and I am the UI lead at our IoT Center of Excellence at PTC. Like Clint mentioned, today we are going to do a mashup makeover. So I will show you how you can be smart about the use of your widgets and by properly utilizing some of the most common ones, achieve a great level of customization and branding. So the agenda for today includes going over, like I already mentioned, some of the common widgets. Those include a layout, a widget, the menu widget, as well as the media entities, style definitions, and some of the other most common widgets that we use in ThingWorx. So to begin with, I will use Jason Wyatt's Mashup. He built that in our previous webinar. This is something that I end up doing a lot on day-to-day basis, assisting people who are more technically inclined and not necessarily graphic designers into basically giving a bit of a makeover of their applications, customizing them, and kind of polishing the UI. So for that, I usually start by duplicating the mashup. So I'm going to go here and duplicate Jason's mashup. And I will also duplicate his master. The master is a very common component that we use, and it typically holds, areas and UI visuals that are, applied to the whole application, and also are generally seen across, internet applications, website, etc. So in the masters, like Jason already included here, we typically have a logo and a label for the name of the company or the application. And a lot of times we also have an area where we have the username and possibly a logout button or something like that. So those are some of the things that you're going to see how we can quickly add here in order to give the header a more complete look. So this is where I'm going to start. As part of the agenda, we will cover widgets and style definitions as well as images, and I will use all of those simultaneously to show you the main point that I'd like to illustrate here, which is that by using a few very common widgets, you can actually achieve, a really nice and custom look. So what I'm going to do here in the master, I'm going to cut the part that's in the header of our layout, and I'm going to drop in its place a layout widget. You will see how I'm going to use the layout widget a lot throughout this presentation. It allows you to build, as it is called itself, the layout of your application But a good organized layout is crucial for a good UI. Aligned and organized content is just easier to the eye. So I'm going to add a layout widget with a left sidebar and a right sidebar. And in my right sidebar, I'm going to paste what I cut from Jason's mashup earlier. So I'm going to select the header and paste. Okay. I'm going to go into the layout properties. So another thing that you will see a lot throughout the presentation is focusing on some of the properties. So each widget has a limited number, but when you combine them together, you're able to apply numerous changes that could be part of your design, and that could impact the way that your UI looks in the end. So I'm adjusting the header here a little bit. I'm going to make it much smaller. And so let's see, we'll do something like 50 pixels. Actually, let's do more like 80. And while I'm doing these changes, the one thing to keep in mind is that it's very helpful to have some sort of plan about how to approach your design, and especially if design is not your background and not your forte, it could be a little bit challenging to begin with. But all out-of-the-box widgets typically do need to be edited as far as style, colors, etc. To just to be closer to your brand or to your client's brand. And to do that, you have to, like I said, it's easier to have a plan. So if you don't know where to start from, I would suggest looking for inspiration even online. There are some websites that give you ideas for color combinations. There's also websites where you can get ideas for images or even pay for. So for this application, the first thing that I did was I just put together some colors, and I actually pre-created the style definitions that we're going to use based on my style guide. So you will see that I'm changing a lot of these styles, and I'm picking them from the styles that I created. I like to limit myself so there is not too much going on. A general rule of thumb is that keeping things clear, clean, and not overwhelmed with different colors helps a lot. So for all panels, the default style involves an outline, and I typically like to remove that. So I just use the default container style, which has no colors as part of its style definition. So I'm going to select that. And I'm going to also change my image. I have picked a sample placeholder image. Like I said, you can look for inspiration if you're just starting, or another common thing in applications these days is, again, in order to keep things relatively clean and simple, just put the name of your application and consider icons maybe eventually. So tightening up this area here, I'd like to make everything a little bit smaller, and I'm also going to change the header background to be white. So that's what I've decided. Some of my colors from my color guide are white, gray, and blue. I think those are typically related with, they could be associated with air, and our application is air quality. So I'm going to choose my background color. And actually, I want my white. So I have about 20 different styles that I'm going to use for my application. I think I selected the wrong one. As best practice, it's recommended that you don't change the default styles and that you create your own and you create specific entities. Sometimes for one-off cases, you can create custom style right from the properties panel of the widget. But like I said, that's just not very smart long term. It's best to extract that and be able to apply it eventually. Okay, so I'm also going to change the style of my label here. Okay, let's see. Okay. Another recommendation for naming conventions, we typically use some sort of prefix in addition to tagging and adding projects as far as, project maintenance. So these are my styles here. You will see I already have some styles that include images, but we will get into that in just a little bit. Okay, so now I just want to make my label here smaller, so it fits in this space. And in this part here, I will put a panel, like I mentioned earlier. Some of the typical things that you see in the header is the username, and it's often accompanied by an icon, like I mentioned, or a logout button. So that would require a panel. So I'm just going to drop the panel. And I will get an image. I already have prepared a little user icon, so I'm going to place that here. Many times I'd like to just go directly into the properties and choose even the sizing options from here. It's I find it to be faster, and you have a lot of control that way. So I know exactly that I want it to be this small, and that goes back to having a bit of a guide, whether it's a high fidelity mockup or something like that. So my icon is also prefixed with this. So there we go. I have a user icon. Now I need a little bit more space. I'm going to make this area a little bit bigger. Okay. And I will put a label here. So far, I've used very limited number of widgets, but you will see how with a little bit more of this content and kind of like unified color scheme, we can change a lot the look and feel. So I'm going to choose from the user tab here where we have user session parameters. I will drag let's just say, I will drag the name. and I will bind it. I'll actually leave this one to be with its default color. That works with my theme. And again, I will change this to be the default container style. Okay. Oh, actually, alt container. Okay. So with that in place, I need to save my mashup. So we'll call this UI webinar 2 master. And I'm going to save this. I'm going to go ahead and save the mashup as well that I've duplicated. And before that, I will set up the new master because it's still it's set up to use JSON's master, but I've duplicated that and saved as my own. And I'd like to assign that. Okay, so here we go. Mashup. So let's see. Okay, webinar master. Save. And we'll call this mashup. Okay, now before I run the mashup and show you how the master looks, I'd like to do a couple of more changes. So firstly, I need to adjust a little bit my logo area, and also I would like to add a navigation to my header. Okay, so my label is right here. And I'm just going to select it and adjust the label itself. And go down here. And for width, I will change something much smaller. Maybe 240 pixels. Okay. And then I'm going to save. Okay. All right, so after this label is positioned, let's see, I'm experiencing a bit of a delay in the save here. I just want to make sure that it's positioned as much as I want it. So I'm going to just go back into the properties because I see that it's still too long, so I will change the width from here, and I will also move it a little bit to the left. Okay. So let's say I'll move it to this far. Okay. So now that I've saved this, the other thing that I wanted to do before I run this mashup and see how it looks, is I want to change the background of it as well. I like to change the background in the master and then remove the background from the main mashup. But you can approach that differently. You can also set up your mashup background from the mashup itself, provided you don't have any padding from the layout here. So I'm going to choose my background color, which is a lighter gray. And while I'm selecting that, which is this the bare background. So I'm leaving some padding. This is a property on the layout widget that you can manipulate, and that plays a role, especially when it comes to your, static containers, where it matters how much pixels you actually have to work with. That property, like I said, it's on the layout. You can pre-select, and you have those abilities in the drag and drop environment, in the simply codeless environment, which we're staying in today. So I'm also going to make sure that this mashup doesn't have a different background, because I want to just have the background that I've defined in the master. So I will double check and make sure that it's there. And in the next area that I'm going to edit, which is the add entry area here in the top left corner, I will do something very similar where I'm going to place a layout and create a bit of a header. So the point that this the demonstration so far is illustrating is that typically you need to combine some widgets. So for example, the layout widget provides you with the ability to anchor things, for example. So in my master, with the right sidebar, I was able to anchor my username to the right. And I then have in the center a responsive container, which doesn't interfere. It's not in the same. It's not the same container with the logo and the text, so I can actually place a responsive widget in there, such as the menu widget. So I'm selecting my mashup here just to make sure again that I don't have any color, and to do that, I'll choose the default container style. So these are some of the steps that you can do in the codeless environment. So a big thing is changing styles a lot. I tend to strip a lot of widgets from their styles, and I'm very conscious about what colors I put. So for example, this out of the box, this provides you, this gives you an idea that this is a whole area here, but let's say for my application, it's a little bit too much color, so I'd probably like to change that as well. And I'll change it to something that doesn't have a background either. As mentioned earlier, media entities and images are also huge in all of this. So far, we've used them for a couple of icons in the master, but they can be incorporated in style definitions. They can be, as part of the design, basically, in addition to text. as you know, as they say, an image is worth 1,000 words. So you can provide a lot of insight by using images as visual guides, as icons, as part of legends. I'll show you in a second here. We will use images as part of a style definition of a button. So out of the box, on the buttons, you have many different states. So hover, active, the regular button style. And as part of all of those, you can include an image that you've created in a different, in an image software program, and really enhance your UI. And that's very simple, adding images to style definitions or simply to your mashup. Really, the whole magic is basically to decide what images you'd like and where you'd want to put them. So now that I've kind of put in the colors for the main theme, and I have my header, I'm finally going to run this mashup, and I'm going to show you sort of like the direction in which it's going. If we have time, I will show you some style adjustments on. I'll show you some style adjustments on the chart. On the chart here, the time series chart and the pie chart. But in case we don't get to it, I will just let you know. And actually, I need my Open Maps widget that I'm missing here. But if we don't get to that, I'll just give you a hint that I will do the same thing that I said earlier. I will probably remove a lot of the styles and leave color and indication only where I want them. So I'm going to put the OpenStreetMap widget that we have available, and from the query property history, I'll drag the data so I have location in, because I'd like to add my pin. So another place where you can use images, like I said, is part of style definition, which can be part of state definition. So you can apply not only color coding, but as I said, image coding, which in other words would be you could create a legend by using images on your map. So you can replace your pins, and I have prepared some color-coded pins that we can add to our map widget. So now I have my data. And just so what I wanted to do is I wanted to actually click through these two really quickly to show you that I did very few actions in reality. And as you can see, I already have more of a feel to my mashup. A little hint again for non-designers. It's very common these days. The trendy sort of approach is more flat design. In general, I would recommend to stay away from gradients. So I'm going to try to get here in this section and show you, again, I'm going to use layout, I'm going to use some images, and I'm going to use some other simple things such as labels and panels to show you how you can customize your area. So for this particular mashup, let's say I will decide to treat it like a dashboard, and I want my little areas to be a bit of a dashboard style, each one to have a title for the area and maybe a button. So in dashboards, a conventional thing to see a principle is to have that header with a title and a button that could possibly exchange the, query the data with filtered, picker, or some other UI element that goes together with the rest of your visualization. So, time selectors are very common to go along with time series chart. You can have also toggle buttons or other buttons to choose pre-selected time ranges. Like you could allow your user to select the last 24 hours or something like that. So how do you add that? That's, for example, not part of the widget itself, but the reason for it is because you have the building blocks and you just need to combine them to create your custom areas. So another example related to the chart is that the time series chart has a default title, but I typically don't use it because other than changing the color of it, I don't have much freedom to change stuff there. So I add my own title by doing what I'm doing right now. So I, like you probably noticed, I cut the panel with all of my with my map selector and the input boxes, and I'm placing a layout in its place because I want to use the header of the layout to create my title area. And in the bottom, I will show you another, you could say a trick, but it's something important to know if you're using the default widgets that will help you position things. So instead of I will paste the widgets actually here, and then I will cut only the widgets without the panel. I will leave the panel that they were inside in the row here in the responsive container. I'll show you something that I just call panel in a panel, and I call it a technique, but it really is basically knowing that you get some additional properties when you place one panel inside another panel. And that's important because it answers the question of how do I center things? How do I make static widgets float in the center of a panel when they typically are based on the X and Y pixel location. So the way to do that is to, again, place one panel inside of the other. I just want to make sure that I grab all of these. Oops. And just make sure that I didn't deselect them. So I'm going to cut my my widgets here, and I'm just going to give it a second to catch up, just to make sure that I have all of my widgets. Not that you can move them eventually, but I'd like to make this with one move. So I'm going to give it a minute here. I think this is okay. So I think I ended up cutting up only 2 widgets, but let's see. Oh no. Okay, perfect. So let me just redo this. And while I wait for it, so I'm just going to show you here in the mashup some of the things that you can style on a chart out of the box. And there are advanced chart widgets available on the marketplace. So certainly check that for any custom options that don't come with the foundation out of the box. So, but for most of them, the things that you can change are, color for your lines. You can change the size and the thickness of it, and also you can change. You can adjust how many ticks you see here, how many labels, the color of the grid in the background. Like I mentioned earlier, I like to keep it clean. It's of course depending on your requirements. Sometimes the background line is really important, but if I have time to do this, I will remove the background grid, and I will probably remove this legend since we're tracking only one thing. And since our time slots here are, or the change in the data is in only let's say in minutes, I can also adjust the format of these labels, and I can remove easily let's say the whole date in year, and leave just, let's say, hours and seconds. Now I'm cutting my widgets here, and I'm going to put a panel inside this panel, and here is where sort of the magic happens. If I select this other panel, I will not have these two properties, horizontal anchor or vertical anchor. So these you see only when you drop one panel inside of another one. And in case it's confusing, there it is in the workspace, the hierarchy. So I can place this I can tell it to float in center and in the middle. And if I make it big enough to contain my widgets, I will paste them. And actually, I see that I need a little bit more space. So I'll make it bigger, and I'll also move this invisible box. Again, aligning things is very big. Sometimes if you run out of space, you can select one of these, which gives you the scroll bar because you define the size. So here I align some of these things. That's kind of like a design principle to remember. And you have the buttons here to assist you with that, so you can select multiple widgets. For example, I can control-click and multi-select all of these and click this button, and now they're aligned to the left. So I'm going to save this. I'm not going to remove the color outline of this panel just for demonstration purposes. As you can see now, it's kind of to the left. I'm going to reload the mashup, and boom, there we go. It floats in the middle. It will look much better if I delete the outlines and set up the default container style. And here I'm going to drop a layout widget and show you again how we can anchor. And I'm going to speed up a little bit just to make sure that we're able to finish this part and answer any questions. So again, I'm using the layout widget. I want to anchor a button to this part here of my header area, and maybe let's say this button is something for settings. That's the icon that I've prepared to show you, but it could be anything. In designs, I've seen it in applications. It could be switching the content inside here, actually, if you have. So I'm going to use this more grayed out icon for the default state, and I'm going to use a more vibrant one, but still subtle change. That here is a bit of the like the designer's eye, but again, you can look for inspiration online, certainly. I like to use the value display in some cases because it has properties that are very helpful when you want to visualize a particular set of data. So when you connect it to data here, and for right now, I'm just going to use it as a simple label, which might be an overkill because you can use the regular label, but I'm dropping it just to go into some of the properties and show you what you can do with it. So you can bind it to data, or you can pass it a value, and based on the type of data you've selected, you can let me see which one I'd like to use. This area header. And I'm really quickly going to just select the header and change the color, and I'm going to continue talking about the value display. So the value display has render options, which allow you to make adjustments really quickly. So if you bind something that's date and time, you can use some preset localization, basically tokens, that allow you to change regular date and time full format, to, let's say, an abbreviated, just maybe the time, or you can have the day of the week as part of the date time, and that's something that you can do really quickly. Or you can, if you're binding a label, you can say that you're showing an icon or no icon. So those are some of the things that you can quickly do. And you also have some additional properties here that you can use, the composer and the builder here to change. So I've quickly made some adjustments here following the same steps that I did with the header in the master. So I styled I added a color to my header. I added this button with pre-made styles. I added my label, and everything is aligned to where I want it. So now I have a header area here. The other thing that I want to do, just to give it more of that feel of a section in a dashboard, I also want to, now I'm going to find my white background. I also want to give it a white background. Now you could do this in your own mashup, in a separate mashup, and you can have that mashup basically to be a contained mashup. I actually want to make my header a little bit smaller. And that way you have to do this only once. Or if you were starting from scratch and you weren't just making a facelift to an existing application, then you could just create this in the beginning and not have to redo the steps. So the thing that I would do in this part here is basically the same thing. Again, I'm redoing these steps because I already have some widgets and I'd like to keep the binding, so I'm cutting and pasting. So I'm keeping them in my memory. So I can, cut the chart and then also cut and paste the layout. But once I'm here, I can actually, and I like to select my parent layout from here. So now I have this whole layout here. So I'm going to change this to my color, paste, and then change this to, let's say, air quality, historic data. Okay, and so now you can see here that these two areas, well, I want to remove this padding here and make sure the background is white to be the same as the one above. But you can see if I copied the same thing here and added to my pie chart, it will look very similar. So here there's these properties that I was telling you for the date and time format. We can quickly just remove the full date and time. We can remove the grid. So if I do just the default container style, there's a lot of properties here. So the number of labels, the one I want to do is I want to remove the legend. And now I'm going to select the parent layout, and I'm going to remove the padding to make sure that I don't have, and I'm going to try to make this the same size. Make sure that I don't have this, and make it uniform. So this helps you make your areas uniform. Consistency is your huge friend. So definitely stick to the same thing. So again, put a color guide and keep your thing. So really quickly, we're approaching towards the end of the time, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask questions, but there's a couple of things that I want to touch base really quickly here, and one of them is state definitions. I have pre-made state definition, like I mentioned earlier, with my pins. So in the map options, in the Google Map we have it, and in a lot of other widgets, you have the ability to apply state definitions and base them on a particular parameter coming in. So I'm setting these up here, and that gives another, this is just along the lines of the visual insight that you can get. So this is a very typical requirement in all applications. So it's relatively simple, but it's a very important place where images also live. And one other quick thing, I'm going to take five minutes, hopefully at most, from the Q&A session. But I want to show you another thing. So going back to the layout, it has a lot of properties out of the box. If you don't have the time or ability to go into anything more than that. So take a look at those. I cut and pasted my chart here in the column in a vertical layout. And if I select the left sidebar, I can see these properties that sidebars and headers and footers have, which are, you can overlay this area actually. So you can put something here and it can appear over the pie chart, thus maximizing your space and maybe, adding some custom elements to the pie chart that aren't really part of its properties, but in the end, in the UI, look like part of that area. So this could be transparent. It can be expandable and collapsible, and so that's like a drawer function. So you can use that, and you can put specific things just in part of this layout. Little boxes or whatever that could be used as alerts or chat or something like that. So you can do these here. What I want to do is I want to do an overlay and a transparent overlay. And I want to put a value display that shows the reading of the city that I have selected. And it tells me also, for example, if you have a service to track the progression of the values, it shows me the trend. So another place where you can use image to tell more information that words can. So I'm going to use the selected row air quality reading, and I'm going to bind it to the value display. So I'm going to bind it to data. And I'm going to go into the render and state. Here it's a number. You can modify the format of this. I won't go too much into depth, although maybe just for space sake, I'm going to remove that because I don't need it. And then I have this state definition that has arrows to show the trend. So they're static currently, but you can ultimately use just an image and drive it dynamically from the back end to show the real trend for this. So let's see what I've done here. Let's see how that looks. Now, there we go. My right sidebar is overlaid, so it's coming over the legend here. Beware if the legend has more entries, it will get bigger. So that might become an issue, but this is just for demonstration purposes, just to show you how you can overlay things. And the other thing is to show you how you can apply state definition to complement the data, the information that you have in numbers. With that, I'd like to leave, actually, let me just summarize really quickly. So again, look at your properties, rely on your layouts and your labels and your images to create the customization of your areas. Think of the widgets as building blocks that you can combine to get the most out of it. And this is all out of the box and in the drag and drop environment. I did not go into Composer because this is the level sort of like expertise that we're covering today. But in the next webinar, which will be next week, held by my colleague Gabriel Bukur, you will be able with him to dive into the new composer, where you have the ability to actually style things with your custom CSS classes. So you can add CSS, and if you're knowledgeable, you can do anything from drop-down shadows to animation, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just, I'm giving you a sneak peek of the new composer in this section, for example, in case you haven't seen it. But I'd leave my coworker to show you some of the great things that you can do with adding some code and exploring some of the new widgets that we have. So with that, I'll hand back to Clint. And before that, just a quick note: if you'd like to dive in and play around with the mashup that I created today, feel free to go to our developer portal and get the entities from there. There are some additional styles that we didn't apply that are named, buttons and things like that. So you can play around with them a little bit more. So thank you, Clint. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Sveta. If you do have any questions right now, please feel free to submit them through our Q&A pane. We are a bit short on time, so we probably won't be able to get to everyone's questions, but we'll do the best we can. We do have a few that came in already. So first one for you, Sveta. How can we change date format for the x-axis in a time series chart?
Okay, so that's a property on the chart itself. I did that adjustment really quickly, but it's right here. It's x-axis format. It's using the standard programming. I believe this is across many programming languages. So you can just add or delete from here, and that's how you can do that. Okay. I believe that's a short, straightforward answer. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
All right. So where else can state definitions be applied?
State definitions can be applied to the map. So you can add not only color-coded pins, but you can add as part of your state definitions images that describe type of asset, for example. So you can have a little icon there that displays that. You can apply state definitions to the time series charts as well. So you can color code for values that go off, above a threshold. Actually, another great place to add images, and with some code you can also add states for those is as part of the menus. So we didn't get the chance to add a menu, but in our menus we can add icons, and those also can be ultimately swapped out based on whether it's like a hover or an active state, for example.
Okay. Are there any other important hidden features or properties that you didn't discuss that we should know about?
So one to note is the z-index. I'd like to use as well as the visibility. So those things control the position of a widget in relation to other widgets, and also its visibility. I see in applications it's utilized a lot, to control whether a user can see it or not. And on that note, I also get a lot of questions about how to control who sees what. So ThingWorx has a very robust system that handles permissions. We have users, groups, organizations. You can, federate servers. So there's a lot of control over who can see what, either through the model or through some specific, let's say, services or conditions inside the mashups that ultimately get connected to the visibility property of the widgets. And that property exists on all of them.
Okay, and final question we'll have time for today. How can I disable a user from seeing something or doing a certain action?
So again, that is handled through the security system of ThingWorx. So we can set up permissions from here. We have multiple ways of authenticating people from other systems or directly through logging into the ThingWorx application. And also you can create services that are related to your things or to your user session parameters that can define whether somebody sees something or not. And that can be used also for navigating from a mashup to a mashup or for particular user preferences. You can connect those to a persisted, session parameter and, customize your UI for your user that way.
All right, thank you, Sveta. As I mentioned, that's unfortunately all the time we have today. I'd like to thank you all for joining today's webcast. As I mentioned earlier, we will send you a recording of the webcast via email once it's available, in addition to the complete mashup that Sveta went over, so you will receive that via email as well. If you do have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us via our developer community or send us a note via our contact form on the developer portal. Bear in mind that we will answer all your questions in due time. Just want everyone to know that. I hope that you did find today's session valuable and will join us next Tuesday for our Reimagine Your Application UI and ThingWorx 8.2 webcast, where, as Sveta said, we'll be highlighting the latest advancements in our mashup visualization platform. Thanks, everyone.